Krishna. Today we will read Shrimad Bhagavatam. Narayanam namaskritam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamudirahe nashtaprayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavatir uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtaki Krishnaya vasudevaya devaki nandanaya cha nandagopakumaraya govindaya namo namah ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगणा रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनासहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपदान् सहगणा ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च नमः ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे नमो महावदान्याय कृष्ण प्रेम प्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्ण चैतन्य नामने गौरत्विषे नमः हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधो दीनबंधो जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमस्ते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभो नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय. So I will share my screen first. We were reading Shrimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, introduction part, and in that we were reading a short sketch of the life and teachings of Lord Chaitanya, the preacher of Shrimad Bhagavatam. And that last time we have covered, I think, up to this paragraph. Okay, from here we will start. Brahman ultimately refers to the personality of Godhead. Impersonal Brahman realization is just the negative conception of the mundane creations. Paramatma is the localized aspect of Brahman within all kinds of material bodies. Ultimately, the supreme Brahman realization is the realization of the personality of Godhead according to all evidence of the revealed scriptures. He is the ultimate source of Vishnu Tattvas. The Puranas are also supplementary to the Vedas. The Vedic mantras are too difficult for an ordinary man. Women, Sudras, and the so-called twice-born higher castes are unable to penetrate into the sense of the Vedas, and thus the Mahabharata and the Puranas are made easy to explain the truths of the Vedas. In these prayers before the boy Shri Krishna, Brahma said that there is no limit to the fortune of the residents of Brajabhumi headed by Shri Narada Maharaj, Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda Mai, because the eternal absolute truth has become their intimate relative. The Vedic mantra maintains that the absolute truth has no legs and no hands, and it goes faster than all and accepts everything that is offered to him in devotion. The latter statements definitely suggest the personal feature of the Lord. Although his hands and legs are distinguished from mundane hands and legs or other senses. Brahman, therefore, is never impersonal, but when such mantras are indirectly interpreted, it is wrongly thought that the absolute truth is impersonal. The absolute truth personality of Godhead is full of all opulences, and therefore he has a transcendental form of full existence, knowledge, and bliss. How then can one establish that the absolute truth is impersonal? Brahman, being full of opulences, is understood to have manifold energies, and all these energies are classified under three headings under the authority of Vishnu Purana, which says that the transcendental energies of Lord Vishnu are primarily three. His spiritual energy and the energy of the living entities are classified as superior energy, whereas the material energy is an inferior one, which is sprouted out of ignorance. The energy of the living entities is technically called Kshatrajna energy. This Kshatrajna Shakti, although equal in quality with the Lord, becomes overpowered by material energy out of ignorance and thus suffers all sorts of material miseries. In other words, the living entities are located in the marginal energy between the superior spiritual and inferior material energies. And in proportion to the living being's contact with either the material or spiritual energies, the living entity is situated in proportionately higher and lower levels of existence. The Lord is beyond the inferior and marginal energies as above mentioned, and his spiritual energy is manifested in three different phases as eternal existence, eternal bliss, and eternal knowledge. As far as eternal existence is concerned, it is conducted by the Sandhini potency. Similarly, bliss and knowledge are conducted by the Hladini and Samvik potencies respectively. As the Supreme Energetic Lord, he is the supreme controller of the spiritual, marginal, and material energies. And all these different types of energies are connected with the Lord in eternal devotional service. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is thus enjoying in its transcendental eternal form. It is not astounding that one dares to call the Supreme Lord non-energetic. Non-energetic. The Lord is the controller of all energies, and the living entities are parts and parcels of one of the energies. Therefore, there is a gulf of difference between the Lord and the living entities. How then can one say that the Lord and the living entities are one and the same? In the Bhagavad Gita also, the living entities are described as belonging to the supreme energy of the Lord. According to the principles of intimate correlation between the energy and the energetic, both of them are non-different also. Therefore, the Lord and the living entities are non-different as the energy and the energetic. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego are all inferior energies of the Lord, but the living entities are different from all as superior energy. This is the version of Bhagavad Gita 7.4 and 5. The transcendental form of the Lord is eternally existent and full of transcendental bliss. How then can such a form be a product of the material mode of goodness? Anyone, therefore, who does not believe in the form of the Lord is certainly a feckless demon and as such is untouchable and not to be seen persona non grata, fit to be punished by the Plutonic king. The Buddhists are called atheists because they have no respect for the Vedas. But those who defy the Vedic conclusions, as above mentioned, under the pretense of being followers of the Vedas, are verily more dangerous than the Buddhists. Sri Vasudev very kindly compiled the Vedic knowledge in his Vedanta Sutra. But if one hears the commentation of the Mayavada school as represented by the Shankara Sampradaya, certainly he will be misled on the path of spiritual realization. The theory of emanations is the beginning subject of the Vedanta Sutra. All the cosmic manifestations are emanations from the absolute personality of Godhead by his inconceivable different energies. The example of the touchstone is applicable to the theory of emanation. The touchstone can convert an unlimited quantity of iron into gold, and still the touchstone remains as it is. Similarly, the Supreme Lord can produce all manifested worlds by his inconceivable energies, and yet he is full and unchanged. He is Purna, complete. And although an unlimited number of Purnas emanate from him, he is still Purna. Om Purnamada Purnamadam Purnat Purnamujjate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. The theory of illusion of the Mayavada school is advocated on the ground that the theory of emanation will cause a transformation of the absolute truth. If that is the case, Vyasadeva is wrong. To avoid this, they have skillfully brought in the theory of illusion. But the world or the cosmic creation is not false, as maintained by the Mayavada school. It simply has no permanent existence. A non-permanent thing cannot be called false altogether, but the conception that the material body is the self is certainly wrong. Pranava, Om, or the Omkara in the Vedas is the primeval hymn. This transcendental sound is identical with the form of the Lord. All the Vedic hymns are based on this Pranava Omkara. Tattvam Asi is but a side word in the Vedic literatures, and therefore this word cannot be the primeval hymn of the Vedas. Sripad Shankaracharya has given more stress on the side word Tattvam Asi than on the primeval principle Omkara. The Lord thus spoke on the Vedanta Sutra and defied all the propaganda of the Mayavada school. The Bhattacharya tried to defend himself and his Mayavada school by jugglery of logic and grammar, but the Lord defeated him by his forceful arguments. He affirmed that we are all related with the personality of Godhead eternally, and that devotional service is our eternal function in exchanging the dealings of our relations. The result of such exchanges is to attain prema or love of Godhead. When love of Godhead is attained, love for all other beings automatically follows because the Lord is the sum total of all living beings. The Lord said that, but for these three items, namely eternal relation with God, exchange of dealings with Him, and the attainment of love for Him, all that is instructed in the Vedas is superfluous and concocted. The Lord further added that the Mayavada philosophy taught by Sripad Shankaracharya is an imaginary explanation of the Vedas, but it had to be taught by him, Shankaracharya, because he was ordered to teach it by the personality of Godhead. In the Padma Puran, it is stated that the personality of Godhead ordered his lordship Shiva to deviate the human race from him. The personality of Godhead. The personality of Godhead was to be so covered so that people would be encouraged to generate more and more population. His Lordship Shiva said to Devi, in the Kali Yuga, I shall preach the Mayavada philosophy, which is nothing but clouded Buddhism in the garb of Brahmana. After hearing all these speeches of the Lord, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Bhattacharya was struck with wonder and awe and regarded him in dead silence. The Lord then encouraged him with assurance that there was no cause to wonder. I say that devotional service unto the personality of Godhead is the highest goal of human life. He then quoted a shloka from the Bhagavatam 1.7.10 and assured him that even the liberated souls who are absorbed in the spirit of and spiritual realization also take to the devotional service of the Lord Hari, because the personality of Godhead has such transcendental qualities that he attracts the heart of the liberated soul too. Then the Bhattacharya desired to listen to the explanation of the Atmaram Shlok from the Bhagavatam 1.7.10. The Lord first of all asked Bhattacharya to explain it, and after that he would explain it. The Bhattacharya then explained the shloka in a scholarly way with special reference to logic. He explained the shloka in 9 different ways, chiefly based on logic, because he was the most renowned scholar of logic of the time. The Lord, after hearing the Bhattacharya, thanked him for the scholarly presentation of the shloka, and then, at the request of the Bhattacharya, the Lord explained the shloka in 64 different ways without touching the 9 explanations given by the Bhattacharya. Thus, after hearing the explanation of the Atmaram Shloka from the Lord, the Bhattacharya was convinced that such a scholarly presentation is impossible for an earthly creature. Before this, Sri Gopinath Acharya had tried to convince him of the divinity of the Lord, but at the time he could not so accept him. But the Bhattacharya was astounded by the Lord's exposition of the Vedanta Sutra and explanations of the Atmaram Shloka. And thus he began to think that he had committed a great offense at the lotus feet of the Lord by not recognizing him to be Krishna himself. He then surrendered unto him, repenting for his past dealings with him, and the Lord was kind enough to accept the Bhattacharya. Out of his causeless mercy, the Lord manifested before him first as four-handed Narayana and then again as two-handed Lord Krishna with a flute in his hand. The Bhattacharya at once fell down at the lotus feet of the Lord and composed many suitable shlokas in praise of the Lord by his grace. He composed 100 shlokas in praise of the Lord. The Lord then embraced him, and out of transcendental ecstasy, the Bhattacharya lost consciousness of the physical state of life. Tears, trembling, throbbing of the heart, perspiration, emotional waves, dancing, singing, crying, and all the 8 symptoms of trance were manifested in the body of the Bhattacharya. Shri Gopinath Acharya became very glad and astonished by this marvelous conversion of his brother-in-law by the grace of the Lord. Out of 100 celebrated shlokas composed by the Bhattacharya in praise of the Lord, the following two are most important, and these two shlokas explain the mission of the Lord in gist. Let me surrender unto the personality of Godhead who has appeared now as Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He is the ocean of all mercy and has now come down to teach us material detachment, learning the devotional service to himself. 2. Since pure devotional service of the Lord has been lost in the oblivion of time, the Lord has appeared to renovate the principles, and therefore I offer my obeisances unto his lotus feet. The Lord explained the word mukti to be equivalent to word Vishnu, or the personality of Godhead. To attain mukti or liberation from the bondage of material existence is to attain to the service of the Lord. The Lord then proceeded towards South India for some time and covered all he met on the way to become devotees of Lord Shri Krishna. Such devotees also converted all he met on the way to become devotees of Lord Shri Krishna. Such devotees also converted many others to the cult of devotional service or to the Bhagavad Dharma of the Lord. And thus he reached the bank of the Godavari, where he met Shri Ramananda Rai, the governor of Madras, on behalf of Maharaj Pratap Rudra, the king of Orissa. His talks with Ramananda Rai are very important for higher realization of transcendental knowledge, and the conversation itself forms a small booklet. We shall, however, give herewith a summary of the conversation. Shri Ramananda Rai was a self-realized soul. Although outwardly he belonged to a caste lower than the Brahmana in social status, he was not in the renounced order of life, and besides that, he was a high government servant in the state. Still, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted him as a liberated soul on the strength of the high order of his realization of transcendental knowledge. Similarly, the Lord accepted Srila Haridas Thakur, a veteran devotee of the Lord coming from a Mohammedan family. And there are many other great devotees of the Lord who came from different communities, sects, and castes. The Lord's only criterion was the standard of devotional service of the particular person. He was not concerned with the outward dress of a man. He was concerned only with the inner soul and its activities. Therefore, all the missionary activities of the Lord are to be understood to be on the spiritual plane. And as such, the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or the cult of Bhagavad Dharma has nothing to do with mundane affairs, sociology, politics, economic development, or any such sphere of life. Shrimad Bhagavatam is the purely transcendental urge of the soul. When he met Shri Ramananda Rai on the bank of the Godavari, the Varnashrama Dharma followed by the Hindus was mentioned by the Lord. Shri Ramananda Rai said that by following the principles of Varnashrama Dharma, the system of 4 castes and 4 orders of human life, everyone could realize transcendence. In the opinion of the Lord, the system of Varnashrama Dharma is superficial only, and it has very little to do with the highest realization of spiritual values. The highest perfection of life is to get detached from the material attachment and proportionately realize the transcendental loving service of the Lord. The personality of Godhead recognizes a living being who is progressing in that line. Devotional service, therefore, is the culmination of the culture of all knowledge. When Shri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appeared for the deliverance of all fallen souls, he advised the deliverance of all living entities as follows. The Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead, from whom all living entities have emanated, must be worshipped by all their respective engagements, because everything that we see is also the expansion of his energy. That is the way of real perfection, and it is approved by all bona fide acharyas past and present. The system of Varnashram is more or less based on moral and ethical principles. There is very little realization of the transcendence as such, and Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejected it as superficial and asked Ramananda Rai to go further into the matter. Sri Ramananda Rai then suggested renunciation of fruitive actions unto the Lord. The Bhagavad Gita 9.27 advises in this connection. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, and whatever you give, as well as whatever you perform in penance, offer to me alone. This dedication on the part of the worker suggests that the personality of Godhead is a step higher than the impersonal conception of the Varnashrama system, but still the relation of the living being and the Lord is not distinct in that way. The Lord therefore rejected this proposition and asked Ramananda Rai to go further. Rai then suggested renunciation of the Varnashrama dharma and acceptance of devotional service. The Lord did not approve of this suggestion also for the reason that all of a sudden one should not renounce his position, for that may not bring in the desired result. It was further suggested by Rai that attainment of spiritual realization freed from the material conception of life is the topmost achievement for a living being. The Lord rejected this suggestion also because on the plea of such spiritual realization, much havoc has been wrought by unscrupulous persons. Therefore, all of a sudden, this is not possible. The Raya then suggested sincere association of self-realized souls and hearing submissively the transcendental message of the pastimes of the personality of Godhead. This suggestion was welcomed by the Lord. This suggestion was made following in the footsteps of Brahmaji, who said that the personality of Godhead is known as Ajita, or the one who cannot be conquered or approached by anyone. But such Ajita also becomes Jita, conquered, by one method, which is very simple and easy. The simple method is that one has to give up the arrogant attitude of declaring oneself to be God himself. One must be very meek and submissive and try to live peacefully by lending the ear to the speeches of the transcendentally self-realized soul who speaks on the message of Bhagavad Dharma, or the religion of glorifying the Supreme Lord and his devotees. To glorify a great man is a natural instinct for living beings, but they have not learned to glorify the Lord. Perfection of life is attained simply by glorifying the Lord in association with a self-realized devotee of the Lord. The self-realized devotee is he who surrenders unto the Lord fully and who does not have attachment for material prosperity. Material prosperity and sense enjoyment and their advancement are all activities of ignorance in human society. Peace and friendship are impossible for a society detached from the association of God and his devotees. It is imperative, therefore, that one sincerely seek the association of pure devotees and hear them patiently and submissively from any position of life. The position of a person in the higher or lower status of life does not hamper one in the path of self-realization. The only thing one has to do is to hear from a self-realized soul with a routine program. The teacher may also deliver lectures from the Vedic literatures, following in the footsteps of the bygone acharyas who realized the absolute truth. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommended this simple method of self-realization, generally known as Bhagavad Dharma. Shrimad Bhagavatam is the perfect guide for this purpose. Above these topics discussed by the Lord and Sri Ramananda Rai, there were still more elevated spiritual talks between the two great personalities, and we purposely withhold those topics for the present because one has to come to the spiritual plane before further talks with Ramananda Rai can be heard. We have presented further talks of Sri Ramananda Rai with the Lord in another book, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. As the conclusion of this meeting, Sri Ramananda Rai was advised by the Lord to retire from service and come to Puri so that they could live together and relish a transcendental relationship. Sometime later, Sri Ramananda Rai retired from the government service and took a pension from the king. He returned to his residence in Puri, where he was one of the most confidential devotees of the Lord. There was another gentleman at Puri of the name Sikhi Mahiti, who was also a confidant like Ramananda Rai. The Lord used to hold confidential talks on the spiritual values with 3 or 4 companions at Puri, and he passed 18 years in that way in spiritual trance. His talks were recorded by his private secretary, Shri Damodar Goswami, one of the 4 most intimate devotees. The Lord extensively traveled all over the southern part of India. The great saint of Maharashtra, known as Saint Tukaram, was also initiated by the Lord. Saint Tukaram, after initiation by the Lord, overflooded the whole of the Maharashtra province with the Sankirtana movement, and the transcendental flow is still rolling on in the southwestern part of the great Indian peninsula. The Lord excavated from South India 2 very important old literatures, namely the Brahma Samhita and Krishna Karnamrita. And these 2 valuable books are authorized studies for the person in the devotional line. The Lord then returned to Puri after his South Indian tour. On his return to Puri, all the anxious devotees of the Lord got back their life, and the Lord remained there with continued pastimes of his transcendental realizations. The most important incident during that time was his granting audience to King Prataprudra. King Prataprudra was a great devotee of the Lord, and he considered himself to be one of the servants of the Lord entrusted with sweeping the temple. This submissive attitude of the king was very much appreciated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The king requested both Bhattacharya and Raya to arrange his meeting with the Lord. When, however, the Lord was petitioned by his 2 stalwart devotees, he flatly refused to grant the request, even though it was put forward by personal associates like Ramananda Rai and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. The Lord maintained that it is dangerous for a sannyasi to be in intimate touch with worldly money conscious men and with women. The Lord was an ideal sannyasi. No woman could approach the Lord even to offer respects. Women's seats were accommodated far away from the Lord. As an ideal teacher and acharya, he was very strict in the routine work of a sannyasi. Apart from being a divine incarnation, the Lord was an ideal character as a human being. His behavior with other persons was also above suspicion. In his dealings as Acharya, he was harder than the thunderbolt and softer than the rose. One of his associates, Junior Haridas, committed a great mistake by lustfully glancing at a young woman. The Lord as Supersoul could detect this lust in the mind of Junior Haridas, who was at once banished from the Lord's association and was never accepted again. Even though the Lord was implored to excuse Haridas for the mistake, Junior Haridas afterwards committed suicide due to being disassociated from the company of the Lord, and news of suicide was duly related to the Lord. Even at that time, the Lord was not forgetful of the offense, and he said that Haridas had rightly met with the proper punishment. On the principles of the renounced order of life and discipline, the Lord knew no compromise. And therefore, even though he knew that the king was a great devotee, he refused to see the king only because the king was a taller and sent man. By this example, the Lord wanted to emphasize the proper behavior for the transcendentalist. A transcendentalist has nothing to do with women and money. He must always refrain from such intimate relations. The king was, however, favored by the Lord by the expert arrangement of the devotees. This means that the beloved devotee of the Lord can favor a neophyte more liberally than the Lord. Pure devotees therefore never commit an offense at the feet of another pure devotee. An offense at the lotus feet of the Lord is sometimes excused by the merciful Lord, but an offense at the feet of a devotee is very dangerous for one who actually wants to make progress in devotional service. As long as the Lord remained at Puri, thousands of his devotees used to come to see him during the Rath Yatra car festival of Lord Jagannath. And during the car festival, the washing of the Gundicha temple under the direct supervision of the Lord was an important function. The Lord's congregational Sankirtana moment at Puri was a unique exhibition for the mass of people. That is the way to turn the mass mind towards spiritual realization. The Lord inaugurated this system of mass Sankirtana, and leaders of all countries can take advantage of this spiritual moment in order to keep the mass of people in a pure state of peace and friendship with one another. This is now the demand of the present human society all over the world. After some time, the Lord again started on his tour towards northern India, and he decided to visit Vrindavan and its neighboring places. He passed through the jungles of Jharkhand, Madhya Bharat, and all the wild animals also joined his Sankirtana movement. The wild tigers, elephants, bears, and deer all together accompanied the Lord, and the Lord accompanied them in Sankirtana. By this, he proved that by the propagation of the Sankirtana movement, congregational chanting and glorifying of the name of the Lord, even the wild animals can live in peace and friendship. And what to speak of men who are supposed to be civilized? No man in the world will refuse to join the Sankirtana movement, nor is the Lord's Sankirtana movement restricted to any caste, creed, color, or species. Here is direct evidence of his great mission. He allowed even the wild animals to partake in his great movement. On his way back from Vrindavan, he first came to Prayag, where he met Rupa Goswami along with his younger brother Anupama. Then he came down to Benares, Varanasi. For 2 months. He instructed Sri Sanatan Goswami in the transcendental science. The instruction to Sanatan Goswami is in itself a long narration, and full presentation of the instruction will not be possible here. The main ideas are given as follows. Sanatan Goswami, formerly known as Sakar Malik, was in the cabinet service of the Bengal government under the regime of Nawab Hussain Shah. He decided to join with the Lord and thus retired from service. On his way back from Vrindavan, when he reached Varanasi, the Lord became the guest of Sri Tapan Mishra and Chandrasekhar, assisted by a Maharashtra Brahman. At that time, Varanasi was headed by a great sannyasi of the Mayavada school named Shripad Prakashananda Saraswati. When the Lord was at Varanasi, the people in general became more attracted to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on account of his mass Sankirtana movement. Whenever he visited, especially the Vishwanath temple, thousands of pilgrims would follow him. Some were attracted by his bodily features, and others were attracted by his melodious songs glorifying the Lord. The Mayavadi sannyasis designate themselves as a Narayana. Varanasi is still overflooded with many Mayavadi sannyasis. Some people who saw the Lord in his Sankirtana party considered him to be actually Narayan, and this report reached the camp of the great sannyasi Prakashananda. In India, there is always a kind of spiritual rivalry between the Mayavada and Bhagavad schools. And thus, when the news of the Lord reached Prakashananda, he knew that the Lord was a Vaishnava sannyasi, and therefore he minimized the value of the Lord before those who brought him the news. He deprecated the activities of the Lord because of his preaching the Sankirtana movement, which was, in his opinion, nothing but religious sentiment. Prakashananda was a profound student of the Vedanta, and he advised his followers to give attention to the Vedanta and not to indulge in Sankirtana. One devotee Brahmana who became a devotee of the Lord did not like the criticism of Prakashananda, and he went to the Lord to express his regrets. He told the Lord that when he uttered the Lord's name before the sannyasi Prakashananda, the latter strongly criticized the Lord. Although the Brahmana heard Prakashananda uttering several times the name Chaitanya, The Brahmana was astonished to see that the sannyasi Prakashananda could not vibrate the sound Krishna even once, although he uttered the name Chaitanya several times. The Lord smilingly explained to the devotee Brahmana why the Mayavadi cannot utter the holy name of Krishna. The Mayavadis are offenders at the lotus feet of Krishna, although they utter always Brahma, Atma or Chaitanya, etc. And because they are offenders at the lotus feet of Krishna, they are actually unable to utter the holy name of Krishna. The name Krishna and the personality of Godhead Krishna are identical. There is no difference in the absolute realm between the name, form or person of the absolute truth, because in the absolute realm everything is transcendental bliss. There is no difference between the body and the soul for the personality of Godhead Krishna. Thus he is different from the living entity, who is always different from his outward body. Because of Krishna's transcendental position, it is very difficult for a layman to actually know the personality of Godhead Krishna. His holy name and fame, etc. His name, fame, form and pastimes all are one and the same transcendental identity, and they are not knowable by the exercise of the material senses. Hare Krishna. So we will conclude today and continue tomorrow. Jai Jai Shri Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai Jai Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. Thank you, Prabhupada.